My name is Sarah Chen, and I never thought kindness could change everything. It was a cold November evening in Portland, Oregon, when the rain hammered against my apartment windows like an angry drummer. The coffee shop I managed downtown had been particularly busy that day, with everyone seeking shelter from the storm that had been brewing all week. I was settling into my usual evening routine: herbal tea, a good book, and the comforting sound of rain, when I heard it, a soft knocking at my door. Not the confident rap of a delivery person or the familiar rhythm of my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. This was different, hesitant, almost apologetic. Through the peephole, I saw him. A man in his early 30s, soaking wet, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days. His shoulders were hunched against the cold, and there was something in his posture that spoke of exhaustion beyond the physical. "Can I help you?" I called through the door, my hand still on the chain lock. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't quite place. "My name is David. I think I used to live here, a long time ago." Something in his tone made me pause. There was no aggression, no demand, just a quiet desperation that tugged at something deep in my chest. I'd lived in this apartment for 3 years, renting from an elderly landlord who'd mentioned the previous tenant had left suddenly, leaving behind a forwarding address that never worked. "This is apartment 2B, I said, opening the door just a crack, the security chain still engaged. "Yes," he whispered, and I saw his eyes close for a moment. "Yes, that's right. I lived here, before." The wind picked up, sending a spray of rain across the hallway. David shivered, and I noticed his lips had a slight blue tint. Whatever story he had, whatever reason brought him to my door, he was clearly in no condition to be outside. "Look," I said, making a decision that would change both our lives. "You're freezing. Why don't you come in, get warm, and we can figure this out?" The relief that washed over his face was immediate and profound. "Thank you," he said, and there were actual tears mixing with the rainwater on his cheeks. "Thank you so much." I unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. David stepped inside, careful to stay on the small welcome mat. He was taller than he'd appeared through the peephole, maybe 6 feet, with kind eyes and a face that looked like it had seen more than its share of worry. "I don't want to impose," he said, water dripping from his jacket onto my hardwood floor. I needed to see this place again. I didn't expect anyone to be home." I grabbed a towel from the bathroom and handed it to him. "When did you live here?" "About 5 years ago," he said, gratefully taking the towel and running it through his hair. "I shared it with my girlfriend, Emma. We were going to get married." The way he said "were" told me everything I needed to know about how that story ended. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "That must be hard, coming back here." David nodded, looking around my living room with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was furnished differently now. My couch was blue where his had probably been something else. My books lined shelves where he might have had a TV. My plants thrived in windows where he'd once watched different seasons pass. "Everything's different," he said softly. "But the bones are the same. The way the light comes in from the east window in the morning, the sound the radiator makes, the way you can hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television through the wall." I smiled despite myself. "She still watches her telenovelas at exactly 8:30 every night." "Some things never change," David said, and for the first time he almost smiled back. Can I ask what brings you back after all this time?" His face clouded over, and he looked down at the towel in his hands. "It's complicated. I've been away, and I thought maybe Emma might have left something here. A forwarding address, or..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I know how it sounds. Crazy, right?" "Not crazy," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Desperate, maybe, but not crazy." David looked up at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "You're being incredibly kind to a stranger. My grandmother always said you never know what someone's carrying," I replied. "Besides, it's just one night, right? You can sleep on the couch, dry out your clothes, and tomorrow you can... Well, we'll figure out tomorrow." The gratitude in his eyes was overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you." "Start with telling me how you take your coffee," I said, heading toward the kitchen. "And maybe we can piece together what happened to Emma." As I put the kettle on, he was more of a tea person, it turned out. David began to tell me his story. 5 years ago, he'd been a graduate student in environmental science at Portland State University. Emma had been finishing her degree in social work. They'd been together for 3 years, deeply in love, planning a future. We used to talk about getting a dog, he said, settling onto my couch with a mug of chamomile tea. A golden retriever named Charlie. Emma had it all planned out, where we'd walk him, what kind of toys he'd like. She had this way of making the future feel so real, so possible. What happened? David's hands tightened around the mug. I got an offer. A research position in Alaska, studying climate change effects on coastal ecosystems. It was everything I'd worked for, but it meant being gone for 2 years minimum, possibly longer. And Emma didn't want to go? Emma had just gotten a job with a nonprofit here, working with homeless youth. It was her dream job. We tried to make it work long distance, but he shook his head. I was terrible at it. The internet connection was spotty, the time difference was brutal, and I was so focused on my work that I started missing our calls, forgetting important dates. I could see where this was heading, but I let him tell it in his own time. She started pulling away. Our conversations got shorter, less frequent. When I finally got back to Portland for a visit, about 8 months into the project, she was different, distant. She said she needed space to think. Did she ask you to choose? The job or her? David shook his head. That's the thing. She never did. Emma wasn't like that. She knew how much the research meant to me, how rare an opportunity it was. But I think she also knew I wasn't ready to give it up, not even for her. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows, and the apartment felt cozy, intimate in the way spaces do when strangers share truths. When I came back for good, 2 years later, she was gone. No forwarding address, no mutual friends who would tell me where she went. It was like she'd disappeared. That must have been devastating. I told myself she was better off without me, David said quietly, that she'd found someone who could give her the stability, the presence she deserved. But lately, he paused, staring into his tea. I've been having these dreams. Emma calling out for me, like she needed help. It sounds ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to find her, to make sure she was okay. I studied his face in the soft lamplight. There was something he wasn't telling me, something that had brought him back here in the middle of a storm, after 5 years of silence. David, I said gently, what happened that made you come back now? Tonight? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a hospital in Seattle. They'd found my name and number in someone's emergency contacts, an old phone number from when I lived here. My heart started beating faster. Emma? They wouldn't give me details over the phone, just said there'd been an accident, and could I come as soon as possible. By the time I got there, his voice broke. By the time I got there, she was gone. They said she'd been asking for me, but I was too late. The mug slipped from my hands, landing with a soft thud on the coffee table. Oh, David, I'm so sorry. They gave me her personal effects, he continued, his voice steady now in the way that comes after tears have been exhausted. There wasn't much, but there was this. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. It's a receipt from a storage unit here in Portland, paid up for the next 6 months. I took the receipt, studying the faded print. You think she left things there? Things from when you lived together? Maybe. Or maybe it's just old furniture and clothes, but it's the only lead I have, and I needed to come back here first, to remember what we had before I go looking through what she saved. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of his story settling between us. Outside, Portland carried on with its evening, cars splashing through puddles, the distant sound of a train, the city breathing in its sleepy, rain-soaked way. The storage facility won't be open until morning, I said finally. I know. I was going to find a hotel, but when I saw this building, I couldn't leave. I've been walking around the neighborhood for hours, trying to work up the courage to knock on doors to see if anyone remembered us. And you ended up here, and I ended up here, he agreed, with the kindest stranger I've ever met. I made up the couch with my softest blankets and an extra pillow. David insisted on keeping his clothes on. I don't want to impose more than I already have. But he did accept a pair of my ex-boyfriend's sweatpants that I'd never gotten around to throwing out. Thank you, Sarah, he said, as I turned off the lights, for everything. I know this is beyond weird, letting some random guy sleep on your couch. Get some rest, I said. Tomorrow we'll go to that storage unit together. You don't have to. I want to, I interrupted, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Besides, you shouldn't face whatever's in there alone. As I lay in my bed that night, listening to the rain and the occasional creak of the couch springs as David tried to get comfortable, I wondered what tomorrow would bring. I'd always been someone who played it safe, who avoided complications, and kept my life neatly organized. But something about David's story, about the raw grief and hope in his eyes, had awakened something in me I hadn't even known was sleeping. I was about to find out that some kindnesses, once offered, change everything. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee and something that might have been pancakes. For a moment, I lay there, confused, trying to remember why my apartment smelled like someone else's breakfast. Then it all came flooding back. David, the storm, the story about Emma, and the storage unit receipt. Padding to the kitchen in my robe and slippers, I found David standing at my stove, carefully flipping what were definitely pancakes. He'd showered, his hair was still damp, and he smelled like my lavender shampoo, and was wearing the sweatpants I'd given him, along with a clean t-shirt he must have had in his backpack. "Please tell me you didn't go through my cabinets," I said, though I wasn't really annoyed. "The pancakes smelled incredible. Only the basics," he said, with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "Flour, eggs, milk. I found a 24-hour grocery store about 6 blocks from here around 5 this morning. Couldn't sleep, so I figured I'd make myself useful." "You were up at 5? His smile faded slightly. "Bad dreams," he said simply. Seemed better to do something productive than lie there thinking. I accepted the cup of coffee he handed me, perfectly made, with just the right amount of cream, and studied his face. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of more than one restless night. "Want to talk about it?" David flipped another pancake, his movements careful and precise. "I keep dreaming about the hospital room, about getting there too late. But in the dreams, Emma's still there, still breathing, and she keeps saying things I can't quite hear." He paused, spatula suspended over the pan. "Last night she kept repeating something about never stopping. Tell them I never stopped looking," or something like that. A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't say why. "Looking for what?" "I don't know. That's what's driving me crazy." He slid 3 perfect pancakes onto a plate and handed it to me. "Maybe it's just my subconscious trying to process everything. Grief makes you hear things that aren't there." We ate breakfast in comfortable silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving Portland washed clean and sparkling in the weak November sunlight. It was going to be a good day for difficult tasks. The storage facility was a nondescript building in an industrial part of town, surrounded by auto repair shops and wholesale suppliers. The kind of place you'd never notice unless you needed it. David had been quiet during the drive over, clutching Emma's receipt like a lifeline. "Unit 127, the clerk said, handing David a key after checking his ID against Emma's records. "It's been paid up through next month." After that, he shrugged, leaving the implication clear. Unit 127 was at the end of a long corridor, fluorescent lights humming overhead. David's hands shook slightly as he inserted the key into the lock. "You okay?" I asked. "No," he said honestly, "but let's do this anyway." The roll-up door opened with a metallic screech that echoed down the corridor. Inside, illuminated by the harsh overhead light, was Emma's life in boxes. It wasn't what I'd expected. The unit was meticulously organized, with clear plastic containers stacked in neat rows and everything labeled in careful handwriting. This wasn't the hasty packing job of someone fleeing a relationship. This was deliberate, methodical preservation. "Jesus," David whispered, stepping inside. "She saved everything." The first box I opened contained photographs, hundreds of them, arranged chronologically in photo albums with dates and locations written in Emma's neat script. David and Emma at the Portland Saturday Market, laughing over shared funnel cake. David and Emma on what looked like a camping trip, Emma making bunny ears behind David's head as he studied something in the distance. David and Emma in this very apartment, Emma sprawled across the blue couch that was no longer there, David's head in her lap as she read to him. "I remember that day," David said softly, looking over my shoulder at the camping photo. "We hiked Mount Hood. Emma insisted on taking pictures every 10 minutes because she said she wanted to remember exactly how happy she felt." The next box contained letters, not emails or text messages, but actual handwritten letters, dozens of them, all addressed to David, all bearing Emma's careful handwriting, all unsent. David's hands trembled as he opened the first one. It was dated 6 months after he'd left for Alaska. My dearest David, I know you're busy with your research, and I know our last conversation was strained. I've started this letter 100 times, trying to find the right words to tell you how proud I am of you. The work you're doing matters so much. I see the articles you're publishing, the difference you're making, and my heart swells with love and pride. I miss you terribly. I miss the way you hum while you're cooking, the way you leave little notes in my textbooks when I'm studying for exams, the way you always smell like coffee and that eucalyptus shampoo you insist on using. Mrs. Rodriguez asked about you yesterday. She misses hearing you play guitar in the evenings. I miss it too. I miss a lot of things. I've been thinking about Charlie, our theoretical dog. Do you think he would have liked the rain? I think he would have been the type to splash in puddles and come home muddy and happy, just like you used to do on your field research days. I love you. I know we haven't been saying it much lately, with the distance and the missed calls and the way everything feels strained. But I love you more than the day you left, if that's possible. I hope Alaska is everything you dreamed it would be. I hope you're finding answers to the questions that keep you up at night. I hope you're happy. All my love, Emma P.S. I'm not sending this because I don't want to add to your stress, but I needed to write it down somewhere. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to say these things out loud again. David's face had gone completely pale. With shaking hands, he reached for another letter. This one dated a year later. David, I dreamed about you again last night. In the dream, you came home early, surprising me at the coffee shop. You ordered your usual, large coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and when I handed it to you, you smiled the way you used to smile when we first met, like I was the most fascinating person you'd ever encountered. I woke up crying, which is embarrassing to admit even to myself. I know I've been distant lately. I know our phone calls have been awkward, that I haven't been good at hiding my loneliness. It's not fair to you. You didn't choose this distance. We both did. But God, David, it's so much harder than I thought it would be. I started seeing a counselor, Dr. Martinez. She's helping me work through some things. She says I need to stop waiting for my real life to begin and start living the life I have. But how do you do that when half your heart is in Alaska, studying ice cores and saving the world? I'm proud of you. I need you to know that. Whatever happens with us, wherever we end up, I am so incredibly proud of the work you're doing. You're making a difference in ways that matter, but I'm also learning that I matter too, that my needs and dreams and feelings are valid, even when they conflict with yours. Dr. Martinez says, this is progress. I love you. I will always love you. But I'm starting to think that might not be enough. Emma, she was in therapy, I said softly. She was working through it. David nodded, unable to speak. He reached for a third letter, this one dated just 3 months before he returned to Portland. David, by the time you read this, if you ever read this, I'll be gone. Not gone, but gone from here, from our apartment, from the life we built together. I can't do it anymore. The waiting, the hoping, the trying to keep my life small enough to fit around the edges of yours. I love you too much to make you choose, and I love myself too much to disappear entirely. I'm moving to Seattle. I got a job with a crisis intervention program. It's the kind of work I've always wanted to do, helping kids who have nowhere else to turn. Dr. Martinez says I'm finally ready to build a life that's fully mine. I know you'll blame yourself when you find me gone, but please don't. This isn't about you choosing Alaska over me. This is about me finally choosing myself. I'm keeping this storage unit for 6 months in case you want your things when you get back. After that, I'll donate everything and close this chapter of our lives. I hope you find what you're looking for up there. I hope the ice tells you its secrets and the research changes the world. I hope you're happy. And David, when you're ready, really ready, to love someone the way they deserve to be loved, I hope you find them. You deserve that kind of happiness too. All my love. Always, Emma P.S. I still think about Charlie sometimes. I think he would have loved the rain in Seattle too. The storage unit felt too small, too quiet. David sank onto one of the plastic containers, the letters scattered at his feet, and put his head in his hands. She knew, he said, his voice muffled. She knew I wasn't ready to choose her over my work, and she saved me from having to make that choice. She loved you enough to let you go, I said, kneeling beside him. But she also loved herself enough to build a new life, and I never even tried to find her. I just told myself she was better off and moved on with my life. I picked up one of the photo albums, flipping through pages of their shared history. Every picture showed two people deeply in love, but also showed the evolution of that love, from giddy new romance to comfortable partnership to something strained and bittersweet. "David," I said carefully, "what exactly did the hospital tell you about Emma's accident?" He looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. "Car accident. She was driving home from work during a storm, lost control on a curve, hit a tree. They said she was conscious for a few minutes after the paramedics arrived, long enough to give them my name. And she was asking for you? They said she kept repeating my name and something about needing to tell me something important. But she lost consciousness before the paramedics could get any details. Something about his story nagged at me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. We spent the next hour going through Emma's boxes, finding more evidence of a woman who had loved deeply and let go gracefully. Her journals documented her therapy sessions, her growing independence, her excitement about her new job in Seattle. Her last entries, dated just weeks before her death, showed someone who had found peace with her choices. I ran into Janet Morrison at the grocery store today, read one entry. She asked if I ever regretted leaving Portland, leaving David. The question used to make me sad, but today I realized I felt free. Not free from loving him. I don't think I'll ever stop loving him, but free from the weight of waiting for a life that was never going to happen. I'm different now than I was 5 years ago. Stronger, more sure of myself. I know what I want, and I know I'm worthy of having it. If David and I met today, as the people we are now, I wonder if things would be different. Probably not. Some loves are meant to teach you how to love, not how to stay. I think David was that for me, and maybe I was that for him too. I hope he's happy. I hope Alaska gave him everything he was looking for. And I hope someday he finds someone who can love his restless heart without losing herself in the process. As I read Emma's final entry, David was examining something from the bottom of one of the boxes, a small wooden jewelry box that looked handmade. "I gave this to her for our 2nd anniversary," he said, running his fingers over the carved lid. "I made it in a woodworking class. She always kept her earrings in it." He opened the lid, and a small piece of paper fluttered out. Not Emma's careful handwriting this time, but something else, something that made my blood run cold. It was a business card for a private investigator in Seattle, with a handwritten note on the back. "Call me. I found him." David stared at the card, his face completely white. "She was looking for me," he whispered. "Even after everything, she was trying to find me." That's when we heard it, from the storage unit next to ours, muffled but unmistakable. The sound of someone crying. But it wasn't just any crying. It was the deep, anguished sobs of someone in profound pain. And through the thin walls, we could hear words that made David drop the business card like it was on fire. "Tell them I never stopped looking for you. Please, just tell them I never stopped looking." David and I stood frozen, staring at the wall that separated us from storage unit 128. The crying had stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. "Did you hear?" David started. "The same words from your dream," I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I heard them." David moved toward the wall as if in a trance, placing his palm against the cold metal. "Emma?" he called softly. "Emma, is that you?" Silence. We waited for what felt like an eternity, but there was no response. David tried again, louder this time. "Emma, please, if you're there, please answer me." Still nothing. I looked at the business card he'd dropped, then at David's face. The hope there was so raw, so desperate, that it physically hurt to witness. "David," I said gently, "Emma died 3 weeks ago. Whatever we heard, it can't be—" "But what if it wasn't her?" David interrupted, his words coming fast now. "What if the hospital made a mistake? What if she was looking for me and she found something, and she's been trying to reach me?" I wanted to tell him he was grasping at straws, that grief sometimes makes us hear things that aren't there. But the truth was, I'd heard it too. Those exact words, spoken in a voice that sounded nothing like the building's echo or a neighboring unit's television. "There's only one way to find out," I said, making a decision that would prove to be the most important one of my life. "Let's go talk to the manager." The storage facility manager, a tired-looking woman named Brenda, was initially reluctant to give us any information about Unit 128. "Privacy laws," she explained, not looking up from her computer screen. "I can't tell you who rents what unit or when they access it. Please." David said, leaning across her desk with desperate intensity. "I think my fiancé might have rented the unit next to the one I just opened. She died recently, and I'm trying to piece together her final months." Brenda looked up then, studying David's face with newfound interest. "What did you say her name was?" "Emma Rodriguez. Emma Maria Rodriguez." Something shifted in Brenda's expression. She glanced around the empty office, then pulled up something on her computer. "Unit 128 isn't rented under the name Emma Rodriguez," she said carefully. My heart sank, but David pressed on. "What name is it under?" Brenda hesitated, clearly weighing her professional obligations against whatever she was seeing on her screen. Finally, she turned the monitor toward us. "It's registered to Maria Emma Patterson, paid up through the end of this year." David and I exchanged glances. "That's her middle name," David said slowly. "Emma Maria. But Patterson, she never mentioned anyone named Patterson." "According to this," Brenda continued, "she's accessed the unit regularly over the past 6 months. Last time was," she scrolled down, "yesterday, around 3 p.m. "Yesterday?" I said. "But that's impossible. Emma died 3 weeks ago." Brenda shrugged. "I don't question customers' personal situations, but someone with her access code opened Unit 128 yesterday afternoon. Our security system logs every entry." David was gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles had turned white. "Can you show us the security footage?" "I'm sorry, but I can't." "Please," David interrupted. "I'm begging you. If there's even a chance Emma is alive, if there's been some mistake, I need to know." Brenda studied his face for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, I'm not supposed to do this, but..." She glanced at her office door, then back at her computer. "I have a daughter about your age. If something happened to her, if there was confusion about her death, I'd want someone to help me find the truth." She pulled up the security system and scrolled through the previous day's footage. The camera angle showed the corridor where units 127 and 128 were located, though the image quality was grainy and the lighting was poor. "There," Brenda said, pointing at the screen. 3:17 p.m. yesterday. On the screen, we watched a figure approach Unit 128. The person was wearing a hooded jacket and kept their head down, making identification impossible. But the build, the walk, something about the way they moved. "That could be anyone," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "Wait," Brenda said, rewinding the footage. "Watch this part again." She played it in slow motion. As the figure reached Unit 128, they turned slightly, and for just a moment, we could see part of their profile. David made a sound like he'd been punched. That looks like Emma." "David," I said carefully, "you want it to be Emma. Sometimes we see what we need to see." But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely convinced. There was something familiar about the figure's movements, something that matched the woman in all those photographs we'd found in Storage Unit 127. "I need to get into that unit," David said, turning back to Brenda. "Please, I need to see what's inside." "I can't just let you into someone else's storage unit," Brenda protested. "Even if you think you know who rented it." "Then call the police," David said. "Call them and tell them there might be a mistake about a death certificate. Tell them someone who's supposed to be dead has been accessing a storage unit." Brenda looked uncertain, but something in David's tone must have convinced her this was serious. She reached for her phone, then paused. "What if you're wrong?" she asked. "What if this Maria Emma Patterson is just someone with the same name, and we're about to cause a huge scene over nothing?" "Then at least I'll know," David said quietly. "At least I'll have tried." It took an hour for the police to arrive, and another hour of explaining before they agreed to investigate. Officer Martinez, no relation to Emma's therapist, we learned, was skeptical but professional. "We'll need to verify the death certificate first," she said, making notes on a small pad. "If Emma Rodriguez is indeed deceased and someone has been using her identity to access this storage unit, that could constitute identity theft or fraud." While we waited for the verification to come through, Officer Martinez allowed David and me to wait in her patrol car. David hadn't spoken much since seeing the security footage, and I could tell his mind was racing through possibilities, hope warring with logic. "What if she faked her death?" he said suddenly. "What if she was in some kind of trouble, and faking her death was the only way out?" That's a big leap," I said carefully. "And why would she do that?" Her last journal entries showed someone who was happy, someone who had found peace. But the private investigator's card, David insisted. She was looking for me. Maybe she found out something dangerous, something that made her run. Officer Martinez's radio crackled with a response from the station. She listened carefully, then turned to us with a grave expression. "The death certificate is valid," she said. "Emma Maria Rodriguez died 3 weeks ago in Seattle, just as you described. However," she paused, consulting her notes, "there's something unusual. The body was badly damaged in the accident and was identified through dental records. But here's the thing. The dental records on file were from a clinic that closed 6 years ago, and their patient files were destroyed in a fire 2 years ago." My blood went cold. What does that mean? "It means the identification might not be as certain as originally thought," Officer Martinez said grimly. "We're going to open that storage unit." The lock on Unit 128 looked identical to the one on Unit 127, but when Officer Martinez cut it and rolled up the door, what we found inside was completely different. Where Emma's unit had been meticulously organized, this one was chaotic. Papers were scattered everywhere, photographs were tacked haphazardly to the walls, and strings of different colors connected various pieces of information like some kind of detective's conspiracy board. But it was the photographs that made David stumble backward into the corridor. They were all of him. David leaving his apartment building in Anchorage, David at a grocery store, David at a conference in Denver, David at a coffee shop in Portland just last week. Hundreds of photographs taken over what looked like several years, documenting his every movement. "Jesus Christ," Officer Martinez muttered, stepping into the unit. "This is stalking behavior." But I was looking at something else. A desk in the corner where someone had been working recently. There were fresh coffee cups, a laptop that was still warm to the touch, and a notebook filled with handwriting that looked like Emma's, but somehow different, more urgent, more frantic. I opened the notebook to the most recent entry. He's back in Portland. After all this time, he's finally back. I saw him walking down Burnside Street 3 days ago, and my heart nearly stopped. He looks older, more tired, but still so beautiful it hurts to see him. I know I should approach him directly, but how do you explain 5 years of lies? How do you tell someone you love that you've been watching them, following them, documenting their life because you couldn't let go? The accident was supposed to be my way out, a clean break, a chance for both of us to move on, but I couldn't do it. Even after the funeral, even after watching him grieve for someone who wasn't really dead, I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him go. Tomorrow I'm going to tell him the truth. I'm going to knock on that apartment door, our old apartment, and I'm going to explain everything. The staged accident, the body that wasn't mine, the years of watching from the shadows. I'm going to tell him I never stopped looking for a way back to him. I just hope he can forgive me for loving him too much to die. David sank into the folding chair next to the desk, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't even begin to name. Shock, relief, betrayal, hope, all of it mixing together into something that looked like emotional whiplash. "She's alive," he whispered. "Emma's alive." Officer Martinez was photographing the surveillance photos with her phone, her expression growing more concerned with each image. "Mr. Chen," she said to David, "I need to ask you directly. Have you felt like you were being watched or followed over the past few years?" David thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes, especially when I first moved to Denver after Alaska, I'd catch glimpses of someone in coffee shops or feel like someone was behind me on the street. But I thought it was just paranoia, maybe PTSD from losing Emma." "It wasn't paranoia," Officer Martinez said grimly. "This level of surveillance, this obsessive documentation, it's concerning behavior, regardless of the emotional motivation behind it." I was still reading through the notebook, trying to piece together Emma's story. The entries painted a picture of someone who had become increasingly unstable over the years, unable to move on from a relationship that had ended 5 years ago. June 15th, saw David at the conference in Seattle. He looked happy giving his presentation about Arctic ice formations. I wanted to run up to him, to tell him how proud I was, but I couldn't. "How do you explain that you've been dead for 2 years? August 3rd, followed him to the grocery store in Denver. He bought ingredients for pasta carbonara, the dish I taught him to make in our old apartment. Does he remember? Does he think of me when he cooks it? October 12th, he's seeing someone, a blonde woman about my age. I watched them have dinner at that Italian place on 16th Street. She made him laugh the way I used to. I sat in my car afterward and cried until I threw up. December 25th, Christmas Day. David spent it alone in his apartment, reading and drinking wine. I wanted so badly to knock on his door, to be his Christmas miracle. But what kind of gift is a ghost coming back to life? David, I said softly, you need to read this. As David read through Emma's entries, documenting years of obsessive surveillance and emotional manipulation, his face grew paler and paler. This wasn't the woman he'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. This was someone who had been consumed by an inability to let go, who had chosen elaborate deception over honest communication. I don't understand, he said, his voice hollow. Why didn't she just talk to me? After the first year, after she realized she'd made a mistake, why didn't she just come to me and explain? Officer Martinez looked up from her documentation. Sometimes people dig themselves into holes so deep that the truth feels impossible to tell. The longer she waited, the bigger the lie became, until the only way she could see to be with you was through deception. But faking her own death? David said, his voice rising. Making me grieve? Making me blame myself? That's not love. That's mental illness, I said quietly. David, Emma needed help, professional help. Whatever she felt for you, this level of obsession isn't healthy love. As if summoned by our conversation, we heard footsteps in the corridor outside. All three of us froze as the steps grew closer, finally stopping right outside Unit 128. David? The voice was tentative, familiar, and very much alive. David, I know you're in there. I saw the police car. Emma stepped into view, and the world tilted sideways. She looked exactly like the woman in all those photographs, but changed in ways that went beyond the passing of 5 years. She was thinner, almost gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that made her hands tremble. Her hair was shorter, dyed a different color, but those were the same brown eyes that had looked at David with such love in their old apartment photos. "Hello, David," she said, her voice breaking on his name. "I know this must be quite a shock." Officer Martinez immediately moved to position herself between Emma and the rest of us, her hand resting casually but meaningfully on her radio. "Ma'am," she said professionally, "I'm going to need you to stay where you are while we sort this situation out." Emma's eyes never left David's face. "I know how this looks," she said, gesturing at the surveillance photos covering the walls. "I know it seems crazy and wrong, and I know you probably hate me right now, but I need you to understand. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." "You let me think you were dead," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For 3 weeks I thought you were dead. I mourned you, Emma. I blamed myself for not getting to the hospital in time." Tears started streaming down Emma's face. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I couldn't figure out how to come back from this. Every day I wanted to tell you the truth, but every day it got harder." "Whose body was in the car?" Officer Martinez asked, her voice sharp with professional authority. Emma's face crumbled. "A homeless woman named Patricia Patterson. She died in the shelter where I was volunteering. She had no family, no one to claim her body. She was about my height, my build. When I heard about the car accident on the news, a single vehicle crash during the storm, I saw an opportunity. You stole a dead woman's identity and staged your own death," Officer Martinez said, making notes. "That's identity theft, fraud, and quite possibly desecration of human remains." "I know," Emma said, sobbing now. "I know it was wrong. I know I've broken laws and hurt people, but I was drowning, don't you see? I couldn't move on from David, couldn't build a new life, couldn't stop hoping that somehow we'd find our way back to each other. The fake death was supposed to give us both closure, but I couldn't even do that right." I watched David's face as he processed Emma's confession. The hope that had sustained him through the morning was dying, replaced by a horror that was painful to witness. "You've been stalking me for years," he said slowly, "following me, photographing me, documenting my life without my consent. I was trying to take care of you," Emma protested, "making sure you were safe, that you were okay. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt like I was protecting you." "From what?" David stood up, his voice rising. "From having a normal life? From moving on? From finding someone who could love me without losing themselves completely?" Emma flinched as if he'd slapped her. "I never lost myself. I loved you so much that I couldn't figure out how to exist without you." "That's not love, Emma," David said, and his voice was gentler now, filled with the kind of sadness that comes from recognizing a fundamental truth. "That's obsession. That's control. Love doesn't require someone to disappear so that you can pretend to be dead while following them around the country. But I never stopped looking for you, Emma said desperately, echoing the words we'd heard through the wall. Even when you were in Alaska, even when you moved to Denver, I kept track of where you were, what you were doing. I never gave up on us. There was no us to give up on, David replied. We broke up 5 years ago, Emma. We both made the decision to end our relationship. You can't unilaterally decide that never happened. Officer Martinez stepped forward. Ms. Rodriguez or Ms. Patterson, I'm going to need you to come with me to the station. There are several serious charges that need to be addressed here. Emma's face went white. David, please, she said, reaching toward him. Please don't let them arrest me. We can work this out. We can start over. I know I made mistakes, but we love each other. That has to count for something. David looked at her for a long moment, and I could see him seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Not the idealized memory of his college girlfriend, not the perfect love he'd lost, but a woman who had made choices that hurt people, including herself. Emma, he said softly, I did love you. I probably always will in a way. But this isn't love. What you've done, it's not something we can just work out. So that's it? Emma asked, her voice breaking. 5 years of devotion, of never giving up on us, and you're just going to walk away? I walked away 5 years ago, David said. You're the one who couldn't let go. As Officer Martinez led Emma away, David and I stood in the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of an obsession that had consumed 5 years of two people's lives. The surveillance photos stared down at us from the walls, a museum of misplaced love and unhealthy attachment. I'm sorry, I said after a long silence. I know this wasn't the reunion you were hoping for. David nodded, still staring at one of the photos, him sitting alone in a Denver coffee shop, unaware that he was being watched. The terrible thing is, he said quietly, part of me is still relieved she's alive. Even after everything, even knowing what she's done, I'm glad she didn't actually die in that accident. That doesn't make you wrong or weak, I said. It makes you human. I keep thinking about what she said, that she never stopped looking for me. But she was never really looking for me, was she? She was looking for a version of our relationship that only existed in her memory. She was looking for a David who would choose her over everything else, and a love story that would end the way she wanted it to. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She was looking for a fairy tale, but real love isn't about never letting go. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. David was quiet for a long time, processing everything that had happened. Finally, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sarah, he said, can I ask you something? Of course. Last night when I was sleeping on your couch, did you hear me talking in my sleep? I thought back to the previous evening, trying to remember if I'd heard anything unusual. I don't think so. Why? Because I keep having this feeling that I was talking to someone. Not dreaming about Emma, but actually talking to someone who was listening. Someone who cared enough to hear what I was saying. A warm feeling spread through my chest, and I realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, my concern for David had deepened into something more personal, more invested. Maybe you were, I said softly. Maybe you were talking to exactly the person who needed to hear you. As we locked up Emma's storage unit and prepared to leave that place behind forever, I realized that David's story was far from over. The woman he'd loved was alive, but lost to delusion and obsession. The woman he'd grieved was revealed to be someone he'd never really known at all. But sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. And sometimes the person you need to find isn't the one you've been looking for at all. 3 months later, David was living in a small apartment across town from me, close enough that we could meet for coffee, but far enough that we both had space to figure out who we were becoming. Emma had been charged with identity theft, fraud, and stalking. She'd accepted a plea deal that included mandatory psychiatric treatment and a restraining order that prohibited any contact with David for 5 years. I visited him on a rainy Thursday evening in February, bringing takeout from the Thai place we'd discovered together, and a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spent, but felt appropriate for the conversation I knew we needed to have. Any word from your lawyer about the restraining order? I asked, unpacking pad thai and green curry on his small dining table. It's official, David said, opening the wine with hands that were steadier than they'd been in months. She can't contact me, can't come within 500 feet of my home or workplace, can't use any form of social media to monitor my activities. Her therapist says she's making progress, but that it'll be a long road. How do you feel about that? David considered the question while serving the food. It was something I'd learned about him over the past few months. He didn't answer important questions quickly. He thought about them, turned them over in his mind, examined them from different angles before speaking. Relieved, mostly, he said finally, but also sad. The Emma I fell in love with was a real person with real good qualities. She was kind, empathetic, passionate about helping others. Somewhere along the way, she got lost in an obsession that consumed those good parts of her. Do you think she can find her way back? I hope so, David said, and I could tell he meant it. Not back to who she was with me. That person is gone, and honestly, maybe that's for the best. But back to someone who can have healthy relationships, who can help people without losing herself in the process. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the rain pattering against David's windows and creating the kind of cozy atmosphere that made serious conversations feel possible. I'd been thinking about this moment for weeks, working up the courage to say what needed to be said. David, I began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. What is it? He asked, setting down his fork and giving me his full attention. I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to take it. A flicker of worry crossed his face. Are you okay? Is everything all right? I'm fine, I said quickly. It's not bad news, it's just complicated. David leaned back in his chair, that patient expression settling over his features that I'd come to recognize as his listening face. Take your time. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words for something I'd never had to say before. 3 months ago, when you knocked on my door, I thought I was just helping a stranger get through a difficult night. And I was. That's exactly what I was doing. But somewhere along the way, helping you became something more for me. David's expression didn't change, but I saw him tense slightly, as if preparing for impact. I know the timing is terrible, I continued. I know you're still processing everything that happened with Emma, still figuring out what it means to have your grief interrupted by the discovery that the person you were mourning was never actually gone. I know this is probably the last thing you need to hear right now. Sarah, David said gently, what are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that I've fallen in love with you, I said, the words coming out in a rush. Not with your story, not with the romance of your situation, but with you, with the way you think before you speak, with how you make coffee in the morning, with the way you've handled an impossible situation with more grace than anyone should be expected to have. David was very quiet for a very long time. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Sarah, he said finally, I need to be completely honest with you. My heart sank. Okay, I've been thinking about this too. About us, about what's been happening between us. And the truth is, I don't know if I'm capable of having a healthy relationship right now. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, even though his words felt like a physical blow. Emma's obsession with me, her inability to let go, it's made me question everything I thought I knew about love, David continued. How do I know the difference between healthy affection and unhealthy attachment? How do I know if what I feel for you is real or just gratitude mixed with rebound emotions? Those are fair questions, I managed to say. But here's the thing, David said, leaning forward across the table. I've been asking myself those questions for weeks, examining my feelings from every possible angle, trying to be responsible and careful, and all the things I probably should have been with Emma years ago. And every single day, I care about you more. Not because you saved me from a difficult situation, not because you helped me uncover the truth about Emma, but because of who you are when none of that dramatic stuff is happening. I love the way you organize your bookshelves by color instead of author. I love how you always order exactly one more thing than you can finish when we get takeout. I love that you sing along with the radio in your car and don't care if you're off key. A warm feeling was spreading through my chest, but I tried to keep my expression cautious. David, I love that when Mrs. Rodriguez's television broke last month, you spent an entire Saturday helping her figure out how to stream her shows on your tablet. I love that you cry during commercials with dogs in them, and that you always carry cash because you think everyone deserves to be able to buy a cup of coffee, even if they can't afford it. Those are very small things, I said, though I was smiling now despite myself. The best things usually are, David said. Emma loved the idea of me, the ambitious scientist, the dedicated researcher, the romantic figure pursuing important work in exotic locations. But you love the person who burns toast and leaves books half finished when they get boring and has conversations with plants. Your plants are excellent conversationalists, I said, and we both laughed. What I'm trying to say, David continued, is that I think I love you too. But I also think we should be very careful about this. Both of us have just witnessed what happens when love becomes obsession, when attachment becomes unhealthy. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. So what do? We take it slow, David said. We pay attention to whether we're loving each other or the stories we tell ourselves about each other. We make sure we're both maintaining our own lives, our own friendships, our own interests outside of this relationship. And if we can do that, David reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers warm and steady against mine. If we can do that, then maybe we can build something real together, something that doesn't require anyone to disappear or sacrifice their identity or stalk someone across multiple states. That's a pretty low bar, I said, grinning. Sometimes the best relationships are built on surprisingly low bars, David replied, like doesn't fake their own death and respects personal boundaries and actually talks about problems instead of creating elaborate deceptions. When you put it that way, I sound like quite a catch. You are quite a catch, David said seriously, but not because you're perfect or because you complete some missing piece of me. You're a catch because you're a whole person with your own life and dreams and quirks, and I want to be part of that life without consuming it. As we finished dinner and moved to David's couch to watch a movie neither of us really paid attention to, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 3 months ago, David had knocked on my door looking for closure with a dead woman. Instead, he'd found that the woman wasn't dead, that his grief had been built on lies, and that love could be both more complicated and more simple than he'd ever imagined. "Can I ask you something?" I said, during a particularly boring scene in the movie. "Always. Do you think Emma really believed she loved you? Or do you think she knew, on some level, that what she was doing was about control and possession?" David considered this, his arm tightening slightly around my shoulders where I was curled against him. "I think she believed it was love," he said slowly. "I think in her mind, the years of surveillance and the elaborate deception were acts of devotion. But I also think that when you truly love someone, you want them to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. And Emma couldn't do that. Emma couldn't do that," David agreed. "She couldn't let me go, and she couldn't let herself move on. So she created this fantasy where I was still hers, where our relationship was just temporarily interrupted rather than permanently ended. It's sad when you think about it," I said. 5 years of her life consumed by something that wasn't real. "It is sad," David said, "but it's also a choice she made every day for 5 years. Every time she decided to follow me instead of going to therapy. Every time she chose surveillance over self-reflection. Every time she picked obsession over healing." I tilted my head to look at him. "Do you think she would have eventually tried to reinsert herself into your life more directly? Like, if you hadn't come back to Portland? If we hadn't found the storage units? Honestly? Yes, I think so." The notebook entries were escalating, getting more desperate and more detailed about wanting to reveal herself to me. I think she was building up to some kind of grand gesture. "That's terrifying." "It is," David agreed. "And it's also part of why I want us to be so careful about building something healthy together. I never want to love someone so much that I lose track of their autonomy, or be loved so intensely that I feel consumed by someone else's needs." The movie ended with some generic romantic comedy conclusion that neither of us had been following, and David muted the credits. "I should probably head home," I said, though I made no move to get up from the couch. "Probably," David agreed, also not moving. "We're taking it slow, remember?" "Very slow," David confirmed. "Glacially slow." "Good," I said, settling more comfortably against his shoulder. "I like slow." We sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of the city. After a while, David spoke again. "Sarah? Thank you." "For what?" "For opening your door that night, for helping me find the truth about Emma, for showing me what healthy love looks like." I turned to face him fully, studying his features in the soft light from the television. "What does it look like?" "Like this," David said, gesturing to the space between us. Like two people choosing to be together without needing to be everything to each other. Like being able to care deeply about someone while still maintaining your own identity. Like trust without surveillance, commitment without possession, love without losing yourself. I like that definition, I said. Good, David said, pressing a soft kiss to the top of my head. Because I have a feeling we're going to be testing it out for a long time. 6 months later, David proposed to me in the most ordinary way possible. We were in the produce section of the grocery store, debating whether we needed more apples, when he suddenly stopped in the middle of the aisle and said, "Sarah, will you marry me?" "Right here?" I asked, looking around at the other shoppers and the pyramid of oranges. "Right here," David confirmed. "I don't have a ring yet, and I haven't planned some elaborate romantic gesture, but I woke up this morning knowing that I want to spend my life grocery shopping with you and debating produce selections and being perfectly ordinary together." "Yes," I said, not even having to think about it. "Yes, absolutely, yes." The elderly woman selecting bananas next to us started clapping, and soon half the produce section had heard the news and was congratulating us. It was chaotic and public and completely unplanned, and it was perfect. Because sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or elaborate demonstrations of devotion. Sometimes it's about choosing someone new every day, about building a life together, one ordinary moment at a time, about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love looks like opening your door to a stranger on a rainy night and discovering that the person you save might just be yourself. Emma served 18 months in a minimum security facility and is now living in a halfway house in Sacramento, participating in an intensive therapy program for people with obsessive attachment disorders. David receives an annual update on her progress through his attorney, but he's never asked for details beyond confirmation that she's still following the terms of her restraining order. We married 2 years after that night in the produce section, in a small ceremony attended by our families and the friends we'd made as individuals and as a couple. Mrs. Rodriguez was my matron of honor, and she cried through the entire ceremony while David's parents took approximately 300 photos. We never did get a dog named Charlie, but we have a cat named Fred who likes to sleep between us and has never once been involved in any elaborate deceptions. David still works in environmental science, now focusing on urban sustainability projects. I opened my own coffee shop, specializing in locally roasted beans and providing employment opportunities for people transitioning out of homelessness. And every morning, when I wake up in our house with its blue couch and carefully organized bookshelves, I remember that love stories don't always begin with love at first sight. Sometimes they begin with kindness to a stranger, with choosing to open a door instead of keeping it closed, with believing that everyone deserves a chance to tell their story. Sometimes the greatest love stories are also the most ordinary ones. Sometimes helping someone else find their way home helps you discover where home really is. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person crying on your couch becomes the person you choose to build a life with. One ordinary, extraordinary day at a time.